always a pleasure to come and connect with the people in the region. I guess my presentation today, I want to talk a little bit about Snowy Hydro as a business and some of the things that we do. I'll talk about some of the Snowy Water Licence, the current rules that we operate to, and then provide a bit of a, our perspective, I guess, on some of the reform that is underway. Before I get started, I too would like to pay my respects to traditional custodians of the lands that we're meeting on. I guess there's a lot of places you can start the Snowy story. We often start back in the 1800s, the water vision, looking to harness what was viewed as, I guess, wasted water heading out down the Snowy River, down to the Tasman, all these, barren but fertile plains out in the Murray-Darling Basin. And that is where the story started. Where the Snowy scheme really kicked off was figuring out how to actually pay for all the infrastructure that will be needed to deliver that sort of water vision. But I'm going to kind of skip a whole bunch of decades and then fast forward to about 2018, where the Commonwealth, it bought out the shares in the Snowy Hydro from New South Wales and Victorian governments. And at that time, the Commonwealth's view was all about Snowy Hydro being a critical part to its, the Australian government's vision to a renewable energy future, to decarbonising the national electricity market. We'll talk a little bit about statement of expectations and SWOIOIDs and some of the things you've already heard a little bit about this morning. At that time in 2018, and still to this day, but probably changing sometime quite soon, the statement of expectations from the Commonwealth in terms of what they expect from Snowy Hydro as a government business enterprise are all about that energy security, delivering the energy grid of the future, and building on their investment, providing some returns. We are a corporate entity, and they do expect a dividend from Snowy Hydro as a company. So what does Snowy Hydro do on a day-to-day basis? We are an integrated energy company, so we generate electricity, we buy and sell a lot of energy in the energy market. We also have over 1.4 million retail customers and counting. That number's been growing at a pretty phenomenal rate. I remember it was probably getting on close to 10 years ago now, where we celebrated the millionth customer, but have continued to grow from there. We have not only the Snowy Hydro scheme that people might be quite familiar with in Snowy Mountains region, also have a number of other gas, diesel power stations spread right around from Central Coast in New South Wales, down in the Latrobe Valley and Laverton in Melbourne, and in Adelaide sort of hills as well. On top of that, we also buy quite a large amount of wind and solar energy from other companies to help supplement the generation capability that we have. So often, depends on which space we're in, which forum we're talking to, but that is what a lot of people see when they think of Snowy Hydro. And just sort of extending a little bit on that kind of, what the Commonwealth sees in us, why they wanted to be complete owner. At the moment, and people are probably used to megalitres and gigalitres and all that sort of stuff, so new unit to sort of talk to for a moment, so bear with me. All those generation assets that we own at the moment, spread across the countryside, about 5,500 megawatts of capacity. So kind of think about that as in water terms, you want to think about a discharge versus a flow rate. So make sure I get this right. So megawatts is, instantaneously, that's the number we can do. So it's like, QMEX. A megawatt hour or a gigawatt hour is the energy. So that's, can you provide that megawatt for a duration of time? So that's a bit more like a volume, a flow, megalitres across the day. We're getting really close to commissioning what's called the Hunter Power Project, a gas-fired power station in the Hunter Valley. 660 megawatts there. And as no doubt people have heard in the news, we're also constructing Snowy 2.0, which is an augmentation of the Snowy scheme, another 2,200 megawatts there. So those investments that Snowy Hydro and, you know, all of us via the Commonwealth have made, and the stat, I'm just going to draw everyone's attention to the kind of bottom line of white text at the top of the screen. In delivering these investments and supporting the additional wind and solar generation that can come as a result of that dispatchable hydropower and gas generation in the NEM, we're going to reduce Australia's CO2 emissions to an extent that these investments in the Snowy are something like 13% of Australia's total kind of greenhouse gas, get the words right here, you know, our emission reduction targets. So people see, you know, $12 billion for 2.0 and some of those things in the media and think, wow, that's a big number. It's a huge contribution to the nation that Snowy Hydro already is making and will make through these investments. So I'm going to thank you, Max, for one of your opening slides. We sit, you know, at the nexus of water policy and energy policy. We did from day one. We did from that original vision. We have right the way through. We still do today, and we've got a lot of heavy lifting to do in the energy space. But it is, you know, ultimately it is important to us to do that in a sustainable way. So I am going to talk a little bit about 2.0 as well, because I'm sure I'll get some questions about it otherwise. There's a bunch of stats on the screen here. I'm not going to read out all of them, but effectively it is going to be a big battery. It's not going to use any more water than the scheme currently uses. It actually means that the scheme overall will, in a net sense, will produce less power in total, but it will produce a whole lot more capacity and power when it's needed, and it will be able to absorb excess power in the energy grid when supply of renewables is exceeding the demands that are in the market at the time. So key parts to the scheme, and I've got a map with a few things sort of from an aerial view shortly, but that 350,000 megawatt hours of energy storage is effectively the full range of Tantangra's active capacity, and then multiplied by, I guess, the efficiency of the Snowy 2.0 power station. So that, as I say, there's lots of different stats and different ways to look at this, but from a water perspective, that 240 odd gigalitres of storage in Tantangra represents being able to provide 2,200 megawatts of energy continuously for 160 hours, which gives you that, the 350 gigawatt hour number there. Project as well, it sort of suffers a bit of bad publicity from time to time, but is going phenomenally well. They're about 60% of the way through the construction project at the moment, and a lot of the guys that are working on the project team are getting quite excited. So until now, the project has really all been about earthworks, excavation, digging tunnels, digging caverns to get to where the power station will be. In this sort of line of squiggles on the map here, Lobbs Hole, which is down in the Urungabilly River, but part of the Tumut River catchment, is kind of a hive of activity. There's, I think there's over 3,000 people working on the project at the moment, and usually at least 1,500, 2,000 of them spending their days living and working down there, and most of the work underground. So the power station itself is over 250 metres long. It's about 30 metres, well, there's two caverns, one's 30 metres and one's about 25 metres wide, and the machine hall, the largest one's going to be about 70 metres deep at its deepest point. But so I think a couple of ways it's been explained to try and visualise that. You can fit the Sydney Harbour Bridge, Harbour Bridge or the Opera House inside the cavern. If you're a New South Welshman, or the MCG, if you're a Victorian, I think would sort of fit inside the hole that we're building 1 kilometre underground. So it's a massive undertaking, and as I say, we're 60% of the way through, but we're still digging holes. But we're getting really close now to getting to the end of some of those excavations. We're starting to build some of the concrete structures that's going to sort of start to go inside the power station complex itself, and then from there over the next couple of years, it's installing all the electrical and mechanical equipment, so the generators, turbines, all the valves. So there's a whole lot of stuff going on. So that's kind of the power station itself. The project has about 27 kilometres of waterway tunnels. So with the bulk of that being this head race tunnel, which if I showed a kind of cross section of this, Tantangra, which is on, everyone's right, try to get that right, about 1,200 metres above sea level. The power station itself and Talbingo Dam at the bottom, about 500, 550 metres above sea level. So there's a huge elevation difference there. The head race tunnel goes across more or less at that 1,200 metre elevation, drops down at quite a steep shaft to the power station and then back up into Talbingo on the other side. This head race tunnel's been where we've had TBM Florence did have a few issues and now making really good progress. We've got about 2 kilometres in on this side. But I think due to the delays we've had there, due to some of the challenging geology we have at the far end of the project, we do have another TBM that's going to commence probably in the new year, or later next year, I should say, start coming back towards Florence. I'll meet somewhere in the middle to make sure that all gets delivered on time. So, hell of a lot of work going on there. You might be wondering why I'm telling you guys all about some energy construction project. What's it got to do with the Upper Murrumbidgee River? And it is this link with Tantangra, I guess. So, slide before I mentioned, so energy storage is a key part of what Snowy 2.0 is being built to deliver. Energy storage is a key part of where Snowy Hydro fits into the grid now and even more so in the future. So there is a very real link here. I'm going to jump into sort of how some of the water management side of things now. Elaborate on that a bit further. I'm going back a century or more now, back to the original stuff. So again, that vision was to divert a whole bunch of rivers that either flow eastwards or flow westwards, but in a kind of quite long, tortuous pathway, divert them to a central storage to be able to really, capture and store and regulate what were very variable inflows. So through droughts and floods, variable every day, every week, every year, turn that into something of a more reliable water source for irrigation in the Murray Basin. We are fortunate to be the custodians of the water that is within the scheme, but we don't own a single drop of water. All of the water that is held within the scheme through the state governments is allocated to a water user, be that agriculture, town supplies, the environment, whatever it may be. We simply have the right to capture that water, use it to produce electricity, but with those rights come a whole bunch of obligations in terms of when and how it can be released. And so people will be familiar. We have the Snowy Montane River's increased flows, another big mouthful of words there, but so the Snowy Montane program delivers water into the Upper Murrumbidgee from Tantangra Dam each year, as well as a number of other smaller streams, as well as the Snowy River Increased Flows program from Jindabyne Dam into the Snowy River. They came into effect when Snowy Hydro was corporatised. The SWIOID was the mechanism to enable that to happen, and our operation effectively is all codified in the Snowy Water Licence, which is legally binding on us and comes with some pretty hefty penalties if we don't comply. So the Snowy Water Licence is really all about providing, it sets a balance, it sets a trade-off. So providing long-term water security, providing flexibility to produce energy and put it into the national electricity market. For those that don't know, energy prices at a kind of wholesale level move every 5 minutes of the day. We'll get dispatched, you need this many megawatts from this power station for the next 5 minutes. You're either on target, everyone's happy, or you're off target and you're going to report to the regulator every 5 minutes, every day of the week. So it requires a huge amount of flexibility. And hydropower has the flexibility that it can turn on and off and ramp up and ramp down really quickly. A lot of other generation sources, so the sort of traditional stuff, the coal power stations, they might take a few days to get online and get up to their load. Solar obviously only works when the sun's out in the middle of the day. Doesn't work so well at midnight. Wind is variable as well. You can't control it, whereas hydro, you need it. You press the button, you turn it on, away it goes. So the licence gives us that flexibility to operate within that space. It provides that long-term water security by setting some yields that we have to deliver into the Murray and the Murrumbidgee River each year. That's what's known as a required annual release. Those volumes, I just met a new colleague over here from the MDBA. They were set looking at the records that were available back in the 50s in terms of inflow patterns, storage volumes, how much can the scheme store and reliably release year in, year out. Was designed around meeting a drought sequence that occurred in the 1930s through the 1940s. So it wasn't the worst drought on record, but it was a very long and persistent drought that was obviously very front of mind when the scheme was built. Those kind of original operating principles and what is codified through the licence when we were corporatised in 2000, in the 90s leading up to corporatisation in 2002, really, I guess there were a lot of questions asked, are they still the right settings? And the belief at the time was that they're about right. Not long after we did the first sustainable yields project with MDBA, CSIRO, and it showed that the settings are about right. Like the scheme may still struggle during some really significant wet periods or during some significant droughts, but you're talking about a trade-off between regular or volume of resource regularly and the reliability of that versus drought proofing. I guess the view was that the scheme was doing about the right job. Those numbers haven't really changed since the scheme was designed, but we're about to jump back into something pretty similar again soon. So climate change obviously always being a big question about, do things still work in the future? Last thing I probably will draw everyone's attention to with the licence is the very bottom right-hand corner again. So those environmental flow programs, decisions were made about trade-offs between water for agriculture versus energy versus the environment through the SWIOID and through the original water licence. They were significant decisions. So there was, in the order of about 20% of the scheme's energy production is already year on year is no longer able to be produced in delivering the existing e-flow programs. So that's definitely something that I think when you're talking to us at Snowy Hydro is front of mind for us, is that there is already a lot of water that is dedicated to environmental flows. We want to make sure that that is being used as efficiently and as effectively as it can be before we start seeing more water being passed. I'll sort of start bringing it back towards Tantangra Dam now. One of the first dams of the scheme built, so we've got 16 dams in total. Its original purpose was to capture the headwaters of the Murrumbidgee and the Goodra-Digby rivers through an aqueduct system, divert those through to Yukonbean Dam for storage. This water that is diverted obviously doesn't pass through the stretch of the upper Murrumbidgee River that we're talking about here. It does find its way back into the Murrumbidgee River again, eventually via the Tumut River near Gundagai. And following that sort of, the SWIOID licence corporatisation, the dam was modified to deliver the current flow regime, primarily focused on avoiding cold water pollution issues, but providing what was necessary to deliver those flows. I've already had a few questions during the breaks around what's been released and when and where and some of that sort of stuff. So I'm just going to try and quick summary of, whatever that is, 60 odd years of history of releases from Tantangra. So once the dam was built, and with my and I didn't mention that at the start, I'm a civil engineer, so if my engineering hat off with the design brief of every drop of water is sacred, capture every drop, the engineers did a pretty good job with that design brief. But there was recognition that water would be needed in the Murrumbidgee for riparian rights. Water has always been released from Tantangra at times, primarily from a human consumption water supply perspective. That averaged out at about 2 gigalitres a year, so it was a very small proportion from the 60s through to the early 2000s. With the introduction of the Montane release program, that's bumped up another 19 GL on average. I'm not going to go into all the detail of that process, but that's managed by the New South Wales government, depends on water allocations and availability in the Wests. Because as I said, everything that is released from the scheme, someone has an entitlement to that water. So if the overall volume available is less, the licences that were brought back to deliver the environmental release programs are less. There is less environmental release made in those years. So it's a process that goes on, but averaging about 19 in very low years. It's been down around 3 or 4 gigalitres, in wet years up around 40, 41 gigalitres. Combined between those riparian rights and the environmental flows, you're talking in the order of about that kind of 8 to 10%. Again, varies. It was 50% in one year where there was a high allocation, and then a very dry year following, and single digits percentages in years where there's low allocations but big inflows. In terms of what we at Snowy Hydro are required to do, under the Snowy Water Licence, every day of the year I've got a daily target, I've got a monthly target, I've got an annual target. Snowy Hydro's role as far as operations is to deliver what is being set by the New South Wales government. There's been references to the Snowy Advisory Committee and a few other places already this morning. They're looking to do the best they can with the budget of water they've got available for the particular year. We work really well with them. So compliance is first and foremost. As I said earlier, people go to jail, big fines, all that sort of stuff if we don't comply with the licence. So it is priority number one above everything to meet. Well, maybe safety might come creeping just a little bit higher. We don't want to kill anyone, but beyond that, making sure we meet all of our regulatory requirements is right at the top of the tree. I guess just highlighting some of the stuff we have done more recently. So there's a bunch of things across the scheme more broadly, but in terms of Tantangra, I'm doing some work with New South Wales at the moment to trial these trigger flows where get a good rainfall event, seeing a natural peak coming in, we try to pass that through the dam, within the same day or two to better mimic what would sort of naturally be happening. Whole bunch of safety and operational restrictions we're trying to work around there. I think, the pictures earlier that I think Andy, your brother, might have taken of the river drying up, we could see those conditions coming, talking to New South Wales government ahead of time, here's what happens under the rules. Do we sort of suspend that for a period to try and get some water through? That was obviously during the bushfires as well, and getting water into towns for firefighting and the likes was, utmost importance as well. And I think, I guess, had Tantangra Dam not been in existence, the river might have been even a bit drier than it was there for a period. So we were releasing more than was coming in to keep some water going down the river, but it obviously was pretty challenging times. I'll keep moving, otherwise I could talk forever about this. Yeah, am I? All right, so I guess just really quickly then, in terms of all the regulatory stuff that's going on, I did say this already earlier, but our role is not to make any decisions. That's for Ryan and the Commonwealth and New South Wales Victorian governments to decide, what is the right balance of water for energy, agriculture, the environment, etc. Our role, so we operate under the licence. I'll jump through a couple of slides, sorry. Key points. So I've mentioned this already. We operate to the Snowy Water Licence. The licence codifies what is in the existing SWIOID, and Snowy Hydro's role is to deliver what's in the licence. So assuming there are changes to the SWIOID that roll into changes in the licence, that is what Snowy Hydro will do. But we don't have any discretion. The licence is very deterministic. We don't have discretion to say something's going on, Snowy Hydro will go and make a decision to release extra water here or there because it's not our water to make those decisions with. So I guess what we see in terms of our role through the review process, it's really going to be about providing advice and information on what the trade-offs will be. So as we said, there will be big decisions to be made. We'll be able to provide some information about what changing flow regimes may mean to our ability to produce electricity or to store energy. I think the things that we are interested in are going to be around, minimising those impacts on what is our energy business, reducing our importance to water users around us, because that is still a big part of our identity, and also potential kind of capital costs. So I think we already max out or we're close to maxing out what Tantanga is physically capable of, and there's no easy way to get a whole lot of extra water through the dam wall. I've probably said most of the stuff here anyway, but I think just to touch on, I guess, Max, your comment earlier about statement of expectations, I guess our view around that is matter for our shareholder. I think we hope to demonstrate through our actions that we're already quite, socially aware and responsible, but we will work with whatever comes our way through that process, and if it means changes to doing things the way we do things, then that's what will happen, I guess. So that's me. Sorry, I brushed through the last little bit there, but thank you.